Everybody. My name is Vicky, and I'm going to be delivering this unit for you, which is in the alcohol and other drugs stream. This is CHCAOD001. This unit will cover work in alcohol and other drugs in context. Let's begin. I'd like to start with acknowledgement to country in the spirit of reconciliation. Hayter Institute of Education acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first inhabitants of this nation and the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, live, and study. We express our gratitude for the sharing of this land, our sorrow for the personal, spiritual, and cultural costs of that sharing, and hope that we may move forward together in harmony and in the spirit of healing. We pay our respects to all First Nation people and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging. And I would like to extend that acknowledgement out to anyone who's watching this recording, and we're happy that you're joining us. So this is going to be done in 4 brief sessions. It's actually quite a big unit. If you're interested in working in alcohol and other drugs, keep in mind that the AOD001 also reflects on what addiction is, and something for us to be able to reflect upon ourselves as well as workers or people wanting to be workers in this sector, that all addiction comes from trauma. So once we've actually considered what happened to you, then we will view the use or misuse of substances, whether they are illicit or prescription, will be based around someone being unable to regulate or to adapt to the conditions that they're experiencing. So often it's referred to as self-medication or self-soothing. In these 4 units or 4 sessions, we're going to be unpacking the depth, the history around alcohol and other drug misuse, the treatment plans that are out there, your role as a worker, the impact this has on you, on our clients, on our community and our nation. And then also, what are some of the other emerging trends that are happening in this space? We cannot separate AOD and mental health either. So because everyone has a mental health, not everyone will use or misuse substances. So we need to look at this generally as non-clinical work and supports. How can we help people who present with more than one issue that they're dealing with? And if the prescription medication or the illicit substances or the legal ones, whatever it is that's not flowing for our clients, how can we approach that and help them, whatever that is? So it will have a chemical influence, a psychological, a social, and an emotional influence on our clients. So it is often referred to as very high and complex needs areas for us to work in. So let's start. So the classes of drugs we'll cover in this one, and then the patterns and the prevalence of drug use in Australia. So AOD use impacts every aspect of users' life, from their family and work life to their health and sense of self-worth. So when there is a family member that is not coping and they are using other addictive type behaviours to manage their mental health or their coping mechanisms, then it can have a very negative impact on the rest of the family. More Australians die from alcohol misuse than any other death in Australia, based on the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So patterns of drug use, it can be experimental initially, a risk-taking type behavior, or I don't know, what have I got to lose kind of approach around it. But then exploring the effects of AOD has on someone's body. Either way, that person loses control. Sometimes they want to just feel numb, or to take a break, or to get a lift, or have something else take over. But there's a reason why people experiment with drugs and alcohol. So it can be considered the legal ones, hotels and going out to dinner or socialising with friends. Alcohol is a big part of an Australian culture as well. It has a social influence. In fact, it can be really hard to not be part of that social use when people are out and socialising. And then situational, may use amphetamines prior to exams to help them cope, and that can be prescription. Intensive, more frequent or harmful use in a range of different settings. And then the dependency, once the chemical takes over, so it can be hard to control or to stop that use. Impact levels of functioning, may experience withdrawal symptoms, would be if trying to get out, then the consequences around trying to detox without some support around somebody can actually make them very unwell. Or stopping suddenly if someone has been a frequent user. So let's have a look at the different drug groups. So we have analgesics, usually for painkillers, and can be misused or over-prescribed. Inhalants, gases or fumes inhaled. This includes vapes. Opioids, opiates or narcotics, painkillers are produced from poppy plants and then manufactured synthetically. And then party drugs or recreational stimulants, hallucinogens, used to enhance that party experience, more energy and heightened of all those senses around. So performance enhancing drugs, increasing sporting ability, prescription, can be misused, or someone can stop using them and then start again. So that would be not how they were originally prescribed. Psychoactive, so it can affect the thinking, feeling, and how people behave. A lot of ADHD clients might be on a psychoactive drug. And then synthetics, developed to bypass drug laws, similar effects to illegal drugs, and sold online. So there can be some other forms of illicit drug use as well that are manufactured. So the different classes, this does impact on the criminality of substance misuse. So depressants, it slows or depresses the functioning. Alcohol is a depressant. Hallucinogens affects the senses, all the sensory parts of what people see, what they hear, taste, smell, everything is heightened when under the influence of a hallucinogenics. And then stimulants that can the function of the central nervous system. So some of those stimulants can be around weight loss. Some of them can be around sleep. Some of them can be where people will take them to stay awake longer. And then, of course, some of them are prescribed as well. Let you watch that in your own time. Around depressants. So a depressant can reduce the ability to concentrate and coordinate your body. Things can slow down, and that reflex action. So it can impact on driving. That's why they will do tests for both alcohol and also perhaps if there's a suspicion of other substances requiring some tests done, and then further would be blood tests. So it can be alcohol, cannabis, and opioids. They're all depressants, especially alcohol. It's a quick lift and then a major drop. So at the very baseline, the strength of the drug, and this can impact the body, the age, the development, and any pre-existing conditions that may be present. how much, so the quantity of the drug, and then the other drugs taken parallel to those, so it may not be the only drug that they took. And if that person's body function and system is acclimatized to that drug, and then the size, weight, and the health that the person has, all of these factors impact how a substance may affect somebody. So a low dose versus a high dose. So low doses, it reduces inhibitions. If it's in a high dose, it can have vomiting, coma, death, blackouts, and memory loss. Some of them in a low dose, in a depressant, can lift a mood. So the prescription, the amount, and the frequency, very important. Misuse of that can have some adverse reactions. So just a reflection point here for you to go to your learner's guide. Do a bit of research around the effects of an individual from alcohol, cannabis, tobacco, another illicit drug, opioids, and prescription drug, codeine. So codeine used to be able to be purchased over the counter, but now that people know more about the effect that codeine has, it is now a prescription, something that the pharmacist has to be involved in rather than just purchase something over the counter. So some of the effects around alcohol are a sense of relaxation, that's short term, but brain damage and dementia is the long term, long use around that. So blurred or double vision can be liver cirrhosis, disturbed sexual functioning, oral, throat, and breast cancers is while someone may have been drinking, here are some of the physical things that long-term effect of drinking in excess can be. Disturbed sleep patterns, some forms of heart disease, and a stroke because of the often the sugar content as well. So it stops our body from being able to regulate and manage that, the same as what food can do. Health effects of medical opioids, so could be constipation, dizziness, dry mouth, and itching, long-term decreased cognitive function, being able to have clarity of thought, a dependency on the drug itself, gastrointestinal bleeding, and then mental health conditions. So sometimes someone can be prescribed a medication, however, it could set off a drug-induced psychosis, and that's with a controlled substance. If it's an uncontrolled substance, then it can result in death. So some of the health effects, it outlines here of what heroin is like. It's a very addictive drug. It's extremely difficult for people to be able to manage and detox on their own. Cannabis, there can be prescription cannabis now, which is different to the cannabis that someone may be able to purchase. It doesn't protect the user if it's prescription cannabis, if they are driving. Those laws are being looked at. However, it still is, even with the prescription that has been prescribed for someone with mental health issues. Usually it's around anxiety and depression. Most oftentimes it is for people who may have ADHD as well. So the short term, of course, is feeling of hunger, rapid heartbeat, a slight sense of calm, going to another place, it feels better. But then if it happens in an early age, it's poor adolescent psychosocial development. So one of those key areas for young people in their emotional well-being and their psychological well-being is understanding who they are and where they fit in. It can impair that and impact that in a negative way. It's also an illicit substance. So there can be a tolerance that you first develop, then a dependent, and then there's a physical dependence where you physically will need to go through a clinical detox to stop putting whatever that substance is into your system. And then stimulants increase the speed of the nerves messages between brain and body, often to enhance, like sport enhancing drugs as well. The cause can be awake, alert, confident, or energetic. Caffeine is a stimulant, amphetamines, and cocaine. So some of the health effects, short-term, yes, can give the energy that someone's looking for. Long-term can be a psychosis. You can have drug-induced mental illness diagnosed, like schizophrenia. Often these come off psychosis. These diagnoses cannot be reversed. So some of the other effects can be extreme weight loss, malnutrition, some are prescription amphetamines, dental problems, high blood pressure, regular infections where your body's immune system is no longer able to function effectively, dry mouth and jaw clenching, and people grinding their teeth. So some reflection. What do we do when we're working with a client? We might see some signs of use, risks, or grandiose type behavior where what they're telling you is exaggerated from what the original story might be. It can have quite a risk to someone's mental health. And then if we were in a class, we would reflect on this. But what I want you to do is to watch some of the videos and reflect on those. And as you come back to our session and our slides. So hallucinogens are often known or referred to as psychedelics. There's quite a lot of study work being done at the moment. It's still early days. However, it can be in a controlled environment, be monitored and managed. It has been known to be very effective for veterans with PTSD who are stuck in that space of where the trauma impacted them, which of course is what post-traumatic stress disorder is. It's the body's inability to be able to focus and regulate and remove that from their body based on a critical event that has happened, something that their mind was not able to cope with. So some of these things can be workshopped and trauma counselling and navigate that space. But of course, if it's very serious, it's the treatment, how quickly we assess somebody in that space, how they are treated after that traumatic event. All of that impacts on the work that we will be able to do. And then what did our client use to be able to self-manage or self-medicate before they received that treatment as well? So there's many different types that people will use. Some are prescription, and of course some are some are illicit or unlawful, and being under the influence of that. So it changes the mood and the ability to function. There's a video there, a couple of videos there on the national drug strategy, and then also around hallucinogenics. So this survey was done in 2019. So a lot of the studies were done because we had those gaps around COVID, which was a pandemic globally. And then, of course, some extra research was done. So the strategy around household during that time, smoking decreased by 11%, which I thought was interesting. And then e-cigarettes or vaping increased significantly. So drinkers increased by 9%, and 25% of Australians involved in risky drinking at least once a month. There's a great program called Hello Sunday Morning, and Chris speaks about people losing their weekend around that as well. It's when we're doing reflection, or if we're in a class, we would explore what are some of those. I'd like you to go and do some research around that as well. What is it that you think is out there? So illicit use of codeine, it halved by 1.5% since becoming a prescription, and then increasing cannabis, 11.6, cocaine 4.2, ecstasy 3%. And then the number of 14 using illicit drugs or under 14 years of age decreased. And then, of course, here's the full report for you. 22,000 Australians, 14 and over, were surveyed for this. So it had a baseline and it had evidence-based data. And that link there will take you there. If it doesn't take you directly, just copy and paste that and put that into your search engine. It'll only be that it will be viewed as a third party trying to access the site, but that's a government site. And so therefore it has credible data and it's available to the public. You'll be asked that in your assessment. That's an important assessment question. So meth or methamphetamine decreased in 2019. Australia has the highest average total of stimulant consumption when compared to 28 other countries across Europe, Oceania, and South Africa. 2021, meth accounted for 8.2% of all drug-related hospitalizations, so almost 12,500, down from the 2019 figures, increasing deaths and 4 times higher than in 2000. 2020 and 2021, right in the middle of COVID, amphetamines were the second most common principal drug of concern in treatment. So who are the most likely target group in the early 2000s? People 20 to 29 mostly used illicit substances, smoked and drank. And then 2019, it was mostly people in their 40s, stabilized into the 30s, and then fell. People under 30, alcohol 40 to 50 are the most prevalent, 1.5 at unsafe levels, so 1.5 times more. And then 2001 to 2019, 18 to 29s who do not drink at all has more than doubled. So has it been improving? Yes. So people over 70 abstained and had declined. So why might some of those demographics have changed? Part of your research is to have a look at alcohol and other drugs during the eras like the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. So all of that happened before then. So you could look at that in chunks of maybe 3 decades to have a look at what are the things that jump out. As part of your assessment is to do research and report on that. So there is separate data around First Nation peoples from 2010 through to 2019, and that had dropped around smoking tobacco. And then 39% of First Nation people drank at risky levels in 2010, however, dropped to 35% by 2019. So more health responses, greater access is being made available. And then, of course, many are incarcerated at that time when the data was captured. They are the most vulnerable members of the community. And when settlers and Australia became colonised, alcohol was introduced along with other infectious diseases as well. Prior to that, First Nation people did not use any substances or alcohol. They did not make a form of alcohol of their own. They are very much lived on the land and are part of and connected to the land. So young Indigenous data of Australians are 14 plus. So when we look at that, we're slightly more likely to abstain than non-Indigenous in 2019. So there was greater education and awareness in that particular target group. And the other thing that was happening at that time was some really good role models coming from First Nation people, where we've got Mitch Tambo, where we've got Jonathan Thurston, just to name a few. So they're going back into their communities and talking about you can take your rightful place, and this is the stuff that is going to get in your way. That will be your barrier, and that will stop you. It will also affect you being able to do the other things that you want to do. So that's quite an education awareness program. Other vulnerable members of the community to cope and manage with mental health and stress would be someone who has a predisposition to psychotic illnesses such as schizophrenia, that an illicit drug, so uncontrolled, could trigger the first episode in a lifelong mental illness. And it could be attached to trauma that is embedded and has been suppressed as well. And then the introduction, it could be cannabis that does that and set that off. So whilst someone might think, oh, that's not really very strong, there's worse, it's different for every single person involved. LGBTIQA plus people in the community are more likely to engage in substance use than those who identify as heterosexual, because that risk-taking behaviour, that low sense of connection and engagement, still trying to find out who they are and where they fit in. This is a coping mechanism to most likely manage things that way, or to be in a social setting and take those risks as well. So most likely to, without diagnosis or treatment, smoke or use cannabis, use meth, use any other illicit drug, and then drink alcohol at risky levels. And then, of course, smoke, and that could be tobacco, that could be vaping, also quite addictive. So the patterns and the prevalence in Australia, how do people get hold of it? It can be as simple as in the post. However, some of the drug crews with the police are prepared to sit on people for 18 months and track and know that a lot of their suppliers coming through Australia Post, and they're happy to sit and wait because they're small. They want to follow, they'll make that first contact, they'll track that person, they'll watch if there's admissions into hospital or ambulance are attending, and then they'll start to monitor who those people are mixing with. So while it might be known and people are trying to get the help, the members of their family, the person can have a false sense of confidence and that nothing is going to happen to them. But I can let you know that most of that team with the police in Queensland, they will actually watch and monitor because they're not as interested until someone establishes a sophisticated business, and then they see them as direct and easy to get through. But single service users, often there can be maybe a diversion program that could be applied unless there's another crime that is happens around that. So the first time someone may go to court could be a diversion program. Treat that as a warning. If you're back here again, it won't be that. So people can lose their jobs, they can lose access to being able to drive a vehicle, a lot of their freedoms and their financial well-being. If their money is going on substances, then to maintain that, often crime comes in, and that mistrust comes in as well. So if you've got members of your family, it can absolutely destabilize. It does affect the whole family. So crypto markets is that hidden, that dark web, that space to be able to do that. But there are plenty who do that absolutely through normal postal services as well. So some are very sophisticated. One of the largest cocaine hauls happened within the last 10 days in the region that I'm in. So a person bought a trawler. They went out, they picked up their supply off the mothership, and then as they brought their trawler back closer to shore, it got stranded near Gari, which is Fraser Island, and search and rescue went, and then that was the largest haul of cocaine that Australia has ever had, over those that 500 million mark, which is the largest they've ever been able to pick up. But in doing so, and there you will now have that major supplier, and the mothership came from China. So just to let you know that this isn't just what we see at a party or in our community. This is a business, and Australia, the only way to access that is maybe through mail services, something through flights, so air and sea. There's a lot of people with private planes. A lot of people will drive to different places. So it'll be supply and demand. And then who is most likely to stay below the radar? Because if it's a big haul, then it comes with quite a long sentence. The more sophisticated something is, then the greater the sentencing around that. So the Australian guidelines around reducing risk or harm minimisation is healthy men and women should drink no more than 10 standard drinks a week. Of course, like I said earlier, that depends on the health of the person initially, the size, their body's capacity as well, but 10 standard drinks for people with no pre-existing conditions, and no more than 4 drinks on any one day. So the guideline, children and people under 18 should not drink alcohol at all. It's unlawful. Can that happen in someone's home when adults are supervising? It's not considered against the law if it's in a private setting. And that's why the word here is should, because there's different laws that apply in different circumstances. But because it's a young body and a young mental health and a young developmental stage, it can permanently affect somebody's well-being, their mental health and their physical. And then guideline 3 is to prevent harm from alcohol to an unborn child. And if someone drank during their pregnancy, it can often be diagnosed as that child being born with fetal alcohol syndrome. That will delay their capacity, their intellectual capacity and their physical capacity. It is not uncommon to be working with, say, a 14-year-old young boy with the body shape of and size and build of a 6-year-old with developmental delays, trying to mix with their mates and have a normal 14-year-old boy's life. They still have the same goals and aspirations, but that'll be because somebody drank and being diagnosed with FASD. So for women who are breastfeeding, not drinking alcohol is the safest for the baby, but even in utero as well, should not drink alcohol or take other stimulants as well. So I will just jump out of there. Which ends us on a recording, but only just to take a brief break as we jump back into some slides on the second part of my delivery for us there. Have a 5-minute break, hydrate and stretch, and come back in for some key learnings. What I'd like to do now is move into our next session. Let me just share my screen for our slide for this one. So we'll call this our session 2 around this, and session 2 of 4. We're doing this in bite size. It's such a big unit, the CHCAOD001, because it's very comprehensive for you to be able to have a good understanding around it. So in session 2, what I want us to be able to do is to cover medications and interactions with AOD and how that's managed, and then some of the social context, and then the economic burden on Australian society, which of course is going to be part of your assessment for this. So, and how drugs can harm, how they harm all of the family, can harm the future for other people as well who are connected. So it is not an isolated disease when someone is struggling with substance misuse. So what happens when people are taking prescription medication, alcohol together? It can clash, interact, and set off a chemical misstep and have adverse effects. So it can be toxic. People can go into toxic shock in their body, and it can impair them. It may not be sudden. It could be happening over a long period of time, but a lot of people view it as out of sight, out of mind, and that it isn't until they've had blood tests or they start to become unwell and think it's something completely different. But it will mostly stem from what people eat and what they drink as well. So nutrition is very important. But then the substances where people don't have control over, or even some dietary intake, those things can clash with prescription medication as well. I know that if people go out and have vitamin D or out in the sun, some prescription medication, some of the psychotic medication that people are taking for depression or PTSD can have adverse effects if people are out in the sun as well. And the instructions will actually say some of that. It will also say the side effects as well. Now, that's generally speaking. It does not mean it will happen with every single person, but we need to be involved in our own health plan as well. So it's important to know when it is not safe to drink alcohol and take medication, which of course, if you go to this site here around Health Direct, it's a government site, medicines and alcohol, that'll be some additional research that you can do. So antibiotics, antidepressants and painkillers, sleeping tablets, cough and cold remedies, and some travel and allergy medicines that people take as well can have, mixed with alcohol, can set off an adverse effect in the body. So much so that people can have an infection, it can move to sepsis, and they can go into toxic shock, and all of that can happen within 48 hours. where people are just going a little off. I think I've got a virus, and then it can happen very, very suddenly if you don't get emergency care. And all of this is preventable. So if you take the wrong medicine with alcohol, your body will treat it like it's a foreign substance. You may get headaches. It's a symptom. Pay attention to that. Dizziness, fainting, and blood pressure can change, either really high or very low. Any uncharacteristic behaviors and loss of coordination and having minor accidents. And this can be a prescription medication, and you're looking for the symptoms, yes, with alcohol, but this can happen with no alcohol as well. So everything that you put into your system is having another reaction with your body, and it won't be the same reaction as it has with other people as well. So benzos and meth is a space that I work in quite a lot, especially in the court system and young people taking risks. At the core of everybody's addiction is trauma, and that's often the work that we will respond to in that space. The target group I work with is up to 35 years of age, so Gen Y, but a lot of alcohol sits around that 50 plus, predominantly in women, predominantly around those social circles as well. So this is not one particular type of person. This can be anybody, anywhere, every socioeconomic group, because alcohol in Australia is such a social setting. And so then, of course, adding other medication with it as well, and then taking some of those medicines can absolutely depress our central nervous system, and our body then starts to dysfunction, or it's a maladaptive coping skill, and it dysfunctions, and then it starts to break down our immune system. And off we go to the doctors thinking, oh, there's something and I can't quite shake it, but it'll be our lifestyle. It'll be the lifestyle choices that we make, and that can simply be coffee. So everything that's a stimulant, that even a natural one, even a prescription one, if it has an adverse effect on you or your client, test those things out. When I'm working with someone with mental health, I will always get them to go and have blood tests done and iron tests as well, just to rule out anything else that is going on, because that's a clinical matter, and then I can work on the non-clinical side of things. So some people can come in and access supports and services, and you can, in a non-clinical way, work on harm minimisation, or your first introduction to them might be through the court systems. There's a video there for you to watch. Moving those slides. So with benzo, it's definitely mental health issues, short-term dependency, long-term risks. It's debilitating. It's highly addictive. It is financially draining, and it can often be the root cause of trauma, and then people trying to cope, and then people becoming addicted, then people in that cycle where they can lose their job. So often young people will go, oh, look, they've got a great car and they've got a great job and things like that. I want to fast track them and say, now let's look at them when they're going to be 50. What does that look like? And what's the difference between that person now, and it all looks shiny and interesting and exciting and risk-taking. Now let's have a look at that person who no longer have a family that want to connect with them, who no longer have a career that they worked hard to build, and do not have any of the things that they worked really hard for. Often mental health issues, often homeless, often before the court systems, because it has taken over their body, and it takes a clinical detox. On average, it can take 7 times and 7 attempts to be able to go through rehabilitation as well. So the interactions, so the single biggest prescribed drug type that leads to overdoses and hospitalizations is with benzos. Quickly sold on the market, and no one can just stop because it's highly addictive. So the political response, when it puts that there for you to be able to have a look at for your assessment work, this is what the government of the day will put towards public funds to be able to fund those programs. And there are different types of programs. So there's been investigations. We've already looked at some of that reduction, harm minimisation. So outside of my role with HADA, I run a residential program for young people, and we work under harm minimisation. So a lot of young people at risk might be before the courts, and they may be using substances or were. Once they come through rehab, then they will reduce that. So some places and some programs are zero tolerance. So it depends on where you would like to work, in what field. But we can't break a habit. We have to replace a habit with another habit. And often we will use a holistic approach to be able to do that. So it will be around mental health and well-being. It will be about nutrition. It will be about getting that proper care with GP. It will be about trauma counselling. It will be about mental health, physical well-being, exercise, and may even introduce something like mindfulness and meditation. It takes a holistic approach because we're working with what happened to you. And started out social, ended up like this, what's happening to you now, and then what are those risks? It is quite rare for someone to self-identify. It usually is other things start to slip away, and someone doesn't really notice that it is affecting them that way. So educational, greater education with our general practitioners, the GP, and then they became more aware, and how mental health and alcohol and other drugs are seen together side by side. We don't remove mental health issues from housing and homelessness, so we do not remove the AOD. So even through the public health system now, alcohol and other drugs and mental health are in the same department. They never used to be, but now they are. It can be very hard for some clinicians to know which to work on first. We can't work on the mental health until we work on the addiction. So we need to stabilise that so that people have better cognitive function, and that they're not a risk to themselves and others. So there are specialist programs. There can be residential rehabilitation, and there can be day rehab, which is usually about 180 days. There can be a clinical detox, which is anywhere between 5 and 10 days, where that requires admission into a residential, and then nurses, doctors prescribing. There might be a substitute they use to help someone detox and manage that. Some people can go daytime to the hospital, but the ones that do that are usually people who've got very good wraparound supports. Who is that? That's us in the community sector. So why is informed consent so important? Because it's around that dignity of risk for people. So we can have commonly prescribed mental health medications. When you're doing your research, you're going to be asked to describe what is one interaction and what is one risk. And when combining these medications with alcohol, when combining these with marijuana, this will have be one of your assessment questions as well, where it wants you to go with your research and reflection around this resource here the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, you'll be asked to look at the social, the political, the economic and the legal context of AOD in Australian households and what laws and legislations, especially in your state and your territory. So you'll be asked to list every state and territory in Australia. This information is available through that resource there. So that is evidence-based, and it forms part of your assessment. So here's some brief social. The risky behaviour that sits around that. Alcohol and other drugs are often behind domestic family violence, other matters before the courts. Rape, rape being an act of anger, not a sexual act. Child sexual abuse. Alcohol and other drugs are often involved in that as well. So domestic family violence talks about who is the highest risk category. And a woman who experienced physical or sexual abuse in the past 10 years, half believe, so 50% believe that alcohol contributed to that as well, that things would escalate and they would know that it was coming on its way. Driving under the influence, drinkers, DUI, drunk under the influence, significantly increases the risk of road accidents. And we spoke about that because it does impact cognitive, clarity of thinking and reflexes. So something that's traveling at a high speed, it's a big, large piece of metal on the road, and other people are also using the road and coming in the opposite direction. Someone's ability to be able to make good judgment calls or to respond if there is something that comes in front, like a kangaroo, or that part of the road isn't good, it will impair your ability to be able to respond. So you get designated drivers if you're going to have social drinking, and you would put strategies in place rather than risk to self or others. We introduce responsible service in alcohol exactly for that reason. So you cannot continue to keep giving somebody drinks if they appear to be under the influence. So in 2020, the statistics showed a 38% decrease from the decade earlier of driving under the influence charges. Oops, sorry. So homicide is the crime of killing a person. Some of the data around those crimes has been captured. Drug and alcohol were prevalent. In the relationship between the victim and the offender was known in 176 homicide incidents as of yesterday. There were 96 deaths, homicides against women with an intimate partner or an ex-intimate partner in Australia, and that is 2024. That is the highest count of death rates of femicide. And there's statistics there where drug and alcohol have also been involved in that, and not necessarily only one person. Just to let you know that it alters people's thinking, it heightens people's responses, not necessarily in a positive way. So alcohol, another drug, and homelessness being linked, a lack of access to services and supports, and family connection, because often family have tried everything they can, but this is subject matter experts are involved in the treatment, the therapy, and then the reconnection. It can make or it can break some families. Some families adopt a tough love approach in the youth sector where I do a lot of my work. However, 1 in 3 Australians have tried some illicit substance at some time, based on the data that we have captured, and please go to those reports. So drugs, mental health, domestic violence are all a toxic combination, and that of course can unravel the absolute very base of how we're meant to function. If we go to Maslow's hierarchy of need, everything starts with shelter. So if people are spending their money on drugs and alcohol, they're not paying their rent, or they're committing a crime. And if they have any kind of social service income, then the government will have a say over that, because that is taxpayers' money and public funds. So they'll bring in mutual obligations. You will do this. If someone is before the courts, then random tests are definitely part of that monitoring and managing. So you will only be released into the community if you test clean. If you test dirty, then you go back in and complete the rest of your sentence. So even someone out on probation can impact their freedom. So the economic impact is $66.8 billion as written in to 2018. So that was quite a number then, and of course 2018 was just before COVID. So we'll have our next lot of data, because our baseline is all shifted now because COVID changed everything. So the economic burden on Australian society, and by that I mean that it changed people's employment, their accommodation, their connection to community, and their overall national well-being, how it has affected people by being socially isolated, all the way through. Even 5 years later, we're still working with young people who have been impacted adversely around the pandemic, and being disconnected from those support systems, their usual world. So the economic burden, it costs money for rehabilitation, costs money in the criminal justice system, and then the costs associated in the health system as well. So the economic impact: accidents at work, absenteeism, and his eye-watering data around that $66 billion. And that's in a 12-month period that has been measured. So employed more likely to spend more money on alcohol because they have more disposable income. And then the history around that is that it increases homelessness, or the risk of homelessness, or preventative. An assessment topic through the decades will be part of what you're going to be doing, the history, and what did the government of the day respond to? What kind of programs? How did they apply treatment? What measures did they put in place? You might refer to it's different in the state or territory that you live in, and then use as another example in your research of another state or territory as well. So when it says political, that's what it's talking about: public policy. And that impacts housing, the health system, education as well. So part of your research in your learner's guide as well. And then here's a link here around Australians have a problem with alcohol. And even Bob Hawke was viewed as an alcoholic, a big and heavy drinker. because that connected him to a lot of the workforce. And originally, while he was a Prime Minister of Australia for a while, he was also the head of the union. So he was very much a working class Prime Minister, and people still related to him. And that was that social connection. So even though it was unhealthy for him, even though it was a depressant, just about every journalist in that era knew. They only had to ask Bob Hawke when he was on television, what do you feel? He would immediately be triggered. If we don't want to trigger our clients, then we say, what do you think? And that's a different approach rather than how do you feel about that? And the feeling will automatically trigger the emotional response rather than the analytical response, which what do you think might happen? And that will be that critical thinking around there, the consequential thinking. But if it's how do you feel, it will take them back to that space of where that open wound is. So our approach in this space needs to be sensitive towards there is something that happened to that person, or something is now happening to that person along the way because of the adverse effect that alcohol and other drugs may have on them. So while someone might come through the door looking for a food hamper, or the family has said, if you don't go and get help, we're not going to let you be around the grandchildren, lots of different reasons of why that's happening, or they've been before the courts and it's court ordered that they go and get that support. And then there is a video there that I would like you to watch. Okay, so that is our session 2. Let's take a stretch and a break, and we'll jump into session 3. So it's good to do this in bite-sized pieces, something to reflect upon. It's a pretty big assessment, this one, I'm aware of, but this is the information that they're looking for. So it's your research, credible sources, a few links in there, some great videos, help you get an understanding around the history of AOD in Australia. So welcome back. This is going to be session 3, or the third part of this unit, CHCAOD001. So by the end of this session, we'll have covered some around the history and the models of drug use, stages of change where people are up to that decision-making process, some reflections, and what are some of the policies and procedures, the legal, and of course the ethical framework around when we're working with someone, what resources we can put, and then where the motivation is for our clients to be able to navigate that space as well. So let me just move some of that, and I'm hoping that your viewing is okay. So what are some of the values, attitudes, and the models around drug use? Society has an opinion around people who are impacted and their body have an adverse effect around this, that there can be a lot of myths, a lot of untruths, a lot of judgment that is applied for and against people around what is addiction. So there's lots of different types of addiction, and even the respectable addict, the workaholic, is revered in society. However, that also is a maladaptive coping mechanism as well. So we'll need to, as workers ourselves, consider the lens that we have going through to know that with every addiction sits trauma. It's all attached to trauma. And what may not have been a single event will be how somebody coped with it. It can be someone who was bullied at school, it can be someone who's been bullied at work, it can be someone who had some developmental delays, and they haven't quite been able to function effectively through the education system, which is pretty much designed for people to be academic and then go on to more academic studies through university. Some people go over into that trade space but unemployment has changed over the decades as well. So we have a different approach around that, what's happening for people. Keeping in mind, of course, that alcohol, one of the major killers in Australia, is a very social tool. It's not illegal. It's only illegal when someone is caught drunk under the influence, or it may impact, but it's legally sold if you're 18 years of age and over, right up until the point where if you're in a public setting or a public house, a pub, or a club, there is a RSA, responsible service in alcohol, where it cannot be to the disadvantage, because someone has impaired decision making if they have had too much to drink. But what happens in private settings or in people's homes, you have no control over that. And we need to be mindful of people unable to be able to make those choices to get that help, because they don't have that clarity of thinking anymore. So it's often hidden and a secret, especially around female clients. So the way in which we think about drug use and the way that society treats people who use alcohol and other drugs, it informs how the community service sector and we as practitioners work with and approach and related issues. So often someone may present and go, look, I don't think I've got a problem with my drinking, but my family is saying that I do. They say I'm quick to anger, but I'm under a lot of stress. It can be rationalized by someone who isn't able to have that clarity of thought. And so usually our approach will be, well, it sounds like your family is pretty important to you. And I want to acknowledge that you've come in to get some help. So we start there, and then we do a treatment plan, and then we have a look at is how much are they consuming, and if that's having an adverse effect, it can impact on diabetes, eyesight, sleep patterns. So we look at and approach this as a way to have a well-being plan around them, and then we may refer out to some other supports, what that might look like as well. But if we don't get to the root cause of what is it that makes this a better option as opposed to another harm minimization approach, and start that reduction as well. Some people will believe that abstinence, complete cold turkey end, is the way to go. That is entirely on that person's makeup and their ability and capacity around the addiction as well. So we need to check in with ourselves. What do we think about that? What do we know about that? Which is why your assessment is really quite a large one on research. But you're going to, research is about informing and educating and getting that from a reliable source. So most of our learners who do this unit find it really interesting. I did when I first did it, and I continue to still be learning in that space. And I find myself as a court support worker, and usually mental health, AOD, coexisting needs, that usually is something that comes up in the court space as well. So the history and the model around drug use, different types, and what has been happening, and then the claims of what people used to say, what people may still say, like, oh, you just stop. If your family meant more to you, you would do it. But if they could, they would, but they can't without therapeutic support. So history and models. There's social learning model, the biopsychosocial model, and then the public health model, the different approaches. So this forms part of your assessment work. There's a video there for you, the 5 models of addiction, part 1 and part 2, which I'd love for you to be able to look at. And let's have a look at the social learning model, which started to come in the 70s. Right around the time after the 1960s, there was a lot of experiment around psychedelic drugs, and then 70s it became more cannabis driven, and alcohol has always been a prevalent factor in Australian culture since the very first colony. So the rum wars, when you start to think about that, rum was part of a staple on the boats because it used to manage the crowd. And it used to be able to stave off hunger pains. And then when people were had their fill, they would sleep and they could better manage that. So it has a social framework around it, why, but in the 70s, drug dependence around the chemical side of it and behavioural social in nature, that definitely started to get studied, and then some of the aspects, so drug use, and then before the 1960s had always been alcohol. There was, in the very early years, snuff, which of course was cocaine. But alcohol prohibition has been around for a very, very long time. It was the religious sect that did not want alcohol because they felt that it was impaired decision making, and they weren't upstanding members of the community. However, they also saw that as a lower socioeconomic and the thing that put people apart. So the term social drinking was invented around that time, but that has never been the case. Since the very early 1700s, when we started to colonize this country, a lot of people's payment would be, if they went to work, they went to the pub, they drank, and there'd be no money for food. That's always been that social model, and now the social learning model started to change in the 1900s. So for a very long time, Australia has had alcohol and alcohol dependence around that, cigarette dependence as well, which of course nicotine was another drug and an addictive one. So the disease model, it exists or coexists with something else. Addiction referred to as irreversible, which is true. So you can stop someone using a substance, but the addictive type personality remains. So we replace that substance with another addictive type behavior, which can often be the gym, which would be the healthier choice, or walking, or really being quite fanatical about the foods that someone has. But it's replacing one habit with another habit, because at the core, at the root cause, is that addictive type personality. So with addiction, again, is always linked to trauma. So the individual is unable to control their intake of a substance if they have that addiction. So that's why they'll seek therapeutic support. As our work is non-clinical, though we often work beside clinicians in this space. So prescriptions, be the power or attraction of a drug can overwhelm the individual's will. It seems exciting and it's risk-taking behaviour. And people are often considered victims of the drug and its effect because it has full control and they no longer do. So it is a chemical rewiring of the brain to be influenced by something psychedelic. So the psychodynamic model was Sigmund Freud in the 1800s. It is still often applied in drug treatment around the psychological therapy, and everyone can trace their problems back to their childhood. So there's that trauma and linking, and it doesn't mean that something had deliberately or intentionally been done to them, but it may be that it happened to them. A lot of this sits around attachment theory, and then having maladaptive coping behaviours around that. And then gaining some insight into what happened to you and how our body keeps score. that now when we work in this space, that we're working with psychodynamics and then psychosocial therapy. Then the bio, which is the body's physical responses and how they are linked, and how a holistic approach of all other treatment plans can be helpful, because we're working at helping people find that dopamine fix that they're looking for, that rush, that feeling that feels really good, and replacing that with something else. So addiction crosses substances, actions. We talk about gambling as an addiction as well. So it's the addictive personality type, and a lot of these are marketed to be more attractive, to be connected part of. You'll feel better, stronger, happier if you're part of this. So often they don't show the maladaptive things or the health things, though people can get desensitized to that. They've done that with cigarettes. They've taken away the brand name and they've put those visuals there, but people will quickly not look at that visual and remove their cigarettes and put it into a vessel that stops reminding them about that until their body makes those decisions for them. So the public health model, they focus on the individual, person-centered, the agent, the drug and its characteristics and its effect, and then the environment, context in which the drug is used. Tell us when this is happening for you. And also, there's a lot of trust and engagement in that space to truly get what is happening. A lot of that will be held back because people don't want to present as bad as what it might be. And there's a lot of secretive type behavior in this, where people don't want other people to know that they believe that they've got it under control. And the 5 stages of change. So these are pre-contemplative, may not think that there is a problem, or kind of aware, but definitely not ready to do anything about it. Then the contemplation, it's like, okay, I might get a little bit of information, and I'm starting to think maybe I will. Often the stage where people will come in to see us. And then the preparation is we collaborate and work with that person. What's a good therapeutic plan that would suit them? What options are available, and gaining informed consent. And then the action could be the referrals and participating into something like that. And then once we've taken the action and we continue to do that, then maintaining that action. So we can have a slip where it's like, oops, got to go back and revisit my action plan. Oops, got to go back, I didn't prepare. So that's slipping backwards around that, and the contemplation, talking ourselves out of that because it's something unfamiliar. I want to go back to how it was before, that it can be very hard for an addict to be pushing through an area that's new and unknown for them. So there's some information there on the stages of change, and then relapse. So there are some very important learning opportunities. What triggered that? I'm learning something about myself now. If I mix with those people, the temptation is there. So a client themselves would be evaluating their attempts so far, and then recognizing the strengths, and then of course the weaknesses of where the temptation may be, or harm minimization, reducing the occasions of use is progress. And then a relapse might occur during the action and the maintenance stages. Most likely it does there, and then straight back in as well. So how do you feel about drug use? What are your thoughts around that? It's reflecting on our own lens, our own worldview. What are our views around people who use drugs, and has it changed as you study this more? What is an unconscious bias that we might have, that's sitting there and we've never really investigated? Now that you have more information, education, and awareness around that, especially at the end of doing this unit and your research project, check in with yourself and look, I thought like this and now I have a better understanding. Now I approach it this way. And then examine your own attitudes towards AOD. And you're studying this to be a worker, what's going to be the best adjustment to have that open mind rather than that fixed mindset? So for us to be able to reflect on that, we have to find out where we're coming from first. What are our views around that? We may have a lived experience. We may be a recovering person. We may have very close members of our family, or we may be influenced by what the media think and say about this. And your reflection. How are these ideas useful in regard to you and your style and how you're going to turn up for your clients? So we work to and inside guidelines, policies and procedures. They are both the legal and the ethical framework that we work with. And we have a duty of care to our clients. And it's only if there's a risk of harm to self or others do we make some adjustment and decisions without collaborating directly with our client. I like to tell my client if I think this is a safety issue and I'm going to need to get some help. It is so much easier if our client is able to be part of that decision-making process. However, if they have capacity, and not everybody does when they're unwell. So our duty of care sits around taking all reasonable steps to ensure our client is safe and our peers who we work with and the safety of others. But our first point is for our client's safety. So we do a risk assessment. They may need clinicians to be part of that alliance circle, that wraparound support. They may need to undergo a clinical detoxification. And how do we go about referring, and may need to have frequent check-ins by a caseworker. And if you are their caseworker, then what does your organisation's policy and procedure say is part of that plan? And that usually drives our frequency. Supporting the dignity of risk and understanding what dignity of risk is, where our clients we provide the information, so it's informed decision making. However, we work on harm minimisation, the best judgment they choose, balancing the consequential thinking, the requirements, the right to undertake activities you may think would put them at risk. And that's where the dignity comes in. And informed consent means that clients understand what they're agreeing to as we refer them over to other medications or services if we're supporting something. We, as non-clinical workers, do not make a diagnosis or prescribe. But we will be walking beside our clients who have had those things happen for them. If they haven't yet, then we refer them out. So mandatory reporting and children in the workplace, if you're working in a setting, then at all times adults are responsible for children. Mandatory reporting is around if our client may be a risk to self and others, but children who are vulnerable, unable to advocate on their own behalf. So that's our duty of care to them and what mandatory reporting is. So under the legislation, we need to report suspicion of child abuse. So abuse in a child is social, emotional, financial, psychological. So denying or neglecting a child for food and clothing, shelter, access to education, all of their human rights is a mandatory reporting stepping off point. It's not for us to make a judgment call. That's why we covered that previously. It's what is required of us as workers. We work inside those guidelines, the legal and the ethical framework. And the best way that we can help our clients is by helping them help themselves. And if it seems overwhelming, then we tackle this one step at a time. And we walk beside our clients. So your assessment topic and research is mandatory reporting requirements for your state or territory. That will be one of your questions. And our work role boundaries. So when we're putting people into residential rehab, there's often no contact with family or the triggers. Phones, 28 days, it's quite common being able to make a phone call from their area, but mobile phones and things like that aren't available. There's often no face-to-face socialising. With us as workers, we don't have any contact with our clients. That's a conflict of interest. We don't talk about people. We don't take them on as a friend on Facebook. We don't talk about our clients outside of the scope of our role, and we would not gossip. That would not be our duty of care in action, nor would we be following protocols. So no staff personal phone numbers shared with our clients, no money lending, and no gifts given or received by staff. So we keep those professional boundaries and those practice standards when we're working with very vulnerable members of our community with high and complex needs, which is what AOD and addiction is. And then work health and safety, our duties and our responsibility, work-related stress, physically, emotionally exhausted. This is a very complex area of work. And occupational violence can be placed in a position very quickly because the aggression, which of course is impacted by the substance. So we must manage our own safety in the workplace. And then what can happen, putting barriers between us, reading the room effectively, and planning for that. So you can leave a client in a room and close that room off so that they can leave. No one ever expects any worker to stay there and place themselves at risk. You never ask that of the workforce, and it would be a particular training to be able to do that. So this is AOD001. It's the introduction and the foundational knowledge and skills for this particular course. This is one unit, and there are multiple units specifically around alcohol and other drugs and how to manage it. CHCAOD001 is an amazing foundational unit, and quite a lot of other courses do this unit as well, because even if we're working in mental health, or we're working in youth work, or we're working in the community service sector, a lot of our target group are vulnerable and need to be skilled in identifying and recognising, and then of course reporting if we need to. So your underpinning knowledge and case studies, and the National Drug Strategy, which is still in place. It's an assessment topic, and they're your underpinning principles right through to 2026, and you'll get a lot of your information from there. So the principles are evidence-based and in collaboration, in partnership. Might be public health, it might be legal aid, might be the police, might be ambulance services. That's our alliance circle where we might triage. And then, of course, the evidence-based practice is implementing some strategies that will reduce the harm and the risk to self and others. So collaboration, referral, seamless referral pathways, and our networks. And then what's the national direction and jurisdiction around implementing these, depending on your state or territory. So what funding has been applied, what programs get supported. And then how do we address emerging issues in our community and the different drug types, especially as new ones get brought in all the time. So in reflection, the National Drug Strategy and its underpinning principles are respect and understanding of the human rights of our clients, so the individual and for the wider community, and the 6 treatment principles outlined in that framework under the National Drug Strategy. And that'll be one of your questions, and it'll ask for the 6 in order as how they present to you. And here are the 6. Some of the guiding principles where we reflect, is this considered best practice? How we plan and engage our clients, collaborate, partnership with stakeholders, some clinical governance. So it may be the doctor has the lead, it may be the clinician, AOD worker, and then where do we sit in the collaboration and partnership section of the community, and then organisational governance around the protocols, what we can and what we cannot do. They're our guiding principles. Some more. So continuous improvement, health and safety, compliance, information systems, and the development of professional development in the workforce and clinical practice, both private and the public system, what drives that space. So that's the end of our session for AOD. So CHCAOD001, and just recapping on that, we've talked about the stages of decision making. We've talked about the history around that. We've talked about who might be some of the wraparound supports and an holistic approach. How this impacts the individual, family unit, and of course the wider community in a negative way. And then of course the cost to the public to be able to service this illness, which is called addiction. So I'll stop sharing for us there. I just wanted to show you the assessment pieces for CHCAOD001. There are 3 tasks inside this particular unit. So task 1 is a quiz. In your learner's portal, it will say T1 of 3, and there will be written questions. Some of those will be quizzes. So you can see here that this is question 1 of 19. The answers sit inside your learner's guide and some information from the links that we sent you and some of the discussion that I've covered, and then also some of those extra videos that are coming out with your slides. So question number 1, there are 5 stages in the behaviour change model. Please describe each stage and why this model is useful in a community service setting. So I wanted to show you this question because while it might be easier to find the first one, which is the pre-contemplative, and then the contemplative, and then we move into the planning, and then the action, and it might be the maintenance as well. There's a second part to this question, and this is something that can happen when we're looking at our work, and it says, and why this model is useful in community service setting. There's two parts to this question. So always look in your questions of please describe each stage and that's the area there that you need to just make sure. So for the answer, yes, they are looking for each. So the pre-contemplative stage, then give a brief summary around what that is and perhaps an example of why that would be helpful in a community setting, which is the non-clinical. Okay, and by that, it means how could that be helpful for you as a worker to help your client? And then discuss the role of item 2 of AOD interventions as a public health strategy. So with this particular one, it has 19 questions, and these are brief questions based on the information that we have covered as well. So I'll just stop sharing and I will show you task 2. So welcome back. This is task 2 of 3. So there's 3 separate tasks in CHCAOD001. With this one here, it says it's your research project. So just an overview and the instructions here. So the task summary is this requires you to report on the current context, the philosophies and values of the AOD sector. You are then required to develop a strategy to apply these philosophies and values to your practices as an AOD worker. So the resources and equipment required to complete this task, we provide you your learner's guide, your other learning materials for your research and some links. You'll need good internet and a device, perhaps a printer as well if you're printing out some of your work, and then access to Microsoft Word or a similar program so you can write your report and then upload that report as well into your browser, into your student portal. So this is something that you do in your own time. And we've done some reflection points for you in your recording. And the due date is, of course, by the time you have to complete all of your studies. I encourage everybody when they start a new unit to do task 1, then task 2, which leads into it, and then task 3. Task 3 of this unit is your practitioner skills. So that'll be a recording with a role play, and we give you the scenario to be able to work with. And then, of course, your other resources are available in your simulated workplace dashboard at First Access, where you'll be able to go in. So if you've been doing some of your core units, you'll have already popped over into the First Access site as you jump into this space now for your specialist subject, which is AOD, alcohol and other drugs. So what happens if you get something wrong? Good question. So you have 3 attempts, and with each attempt, you will get feedback. So it might say in task 1, I showed you there were 19 questions. You might get 18 correct and just 1 incorrect. So you'll get feedback on that. What we're looking for here is this, and we'll point you in that direction. With this one, though, there is only the one, which is the research report. And when you go into your porthole, it gives you the stepping off point, all those questions, what you need to fill in. And of course, if you ever get stuck, After you've given that an attempt yourself, you can reach out to our learner support officers, which is lso@haiderinstitute.edu.au, and ask for some assistance, and ask perhaps if a trainer can help. But your trainer will want to know that you've attempted this yourself, and if there's a question you're stuck on or you need clarification, then they'll guide you over to a trainer who'll be able to assist. So keeping in mind that at the end of this week, we're coming to our end of year semester. So the booking of times with trainer is always essential throughout the year anyway. In this time of the year, it may be that we have less staff on, but all of our staff are sector workers, so we work on different rosters. So within 24, 48 hours, you should hear something back about when a good time would be, or it might get sent to us in an email by our learner support officers. And if you're very clear on your question, it might be, the team might say, oh, Vicky, can you help this learner? They're working on CHCAOD001 task 2 on the research project, but they're a little bit stuck on what it means about this. So make sure you put all of that information into your email, into the learner support officers. It is a really efficient way to get that support, to be very clear of what is the question that you're stuck on, rather than I'm stuck. Be very specific in that space, and then we can target our focus and support to help you through that particular one. So if you get something wrong, you'll get 3 attempts, but each attempt you'll have feedback. If, say, you've exhausted all 3 attempts, then a trainer will, as we're assessing, may contact you, or you will know, you'll get a message that says try again. Contact your learner support officers, and they will make sure that you've got a trainer assessor able to assist you as soon as they possibly can. So you will then upload your file, and in your file, you'll have your research report. You will have your references of where you got that information. There'll be a link on how to do a reference correctly, the strategies in your report, and the values around the report. All of these are part of your questions that are available in your learner portal when you go in to do your assessment. So we'll pause there, and I want to show you what your role play, your practitioner skills assessment is like. Right, so this is task 3 of the unit's assessment work for CHCAOD001. Now, I've brought you over to how we mark and assess a role play so that you can get comfortable in this space. So this is how we're going to measure whether you have effectively done that. So you'll get your instructions in task 3. What do we look for though? So if you do your reading, follow the instructions, practice that, then you'll feel a lot more comfortable in that space. But here, I wanted to show you what do we actually mark you on. So here's item 5 out of 5 steps, our observation checklist. This is what the assessor works with. Did we see or observe you apply the core principles? The safety of the client? Did you do the privacy and confidentiality? Did you apply the core principles into your work? Did you ensure that their support and interventions were what they wanted, person-centered? Did you apply a harm minimization approach rather than a complete stop? You know, like, so it's like, what would that be like if you could reduce that, I wonder, and then work on some strategies? What about supporting the client's rights? Did you discuss that? This is your choice. We will take it step by step and walk beside you. It's a lot of information I've given you today, and we've spoken about a bit. But I'm just wondering, you know, what life might look like with some of those things you spoke about that you had lost or you wanted to regain. And then how's the client's values informed their decision making? Have we really looked at what is the trauma, the deeper side of it? What happened to you? I'm just wondering, has there been a time where things were going really well for you, and what was different then to now? And then how is the organisation's value impacted on the work with each client? Well, that'll be your protocols, your policies and procedures. And we'll be looking at, have you raised that with your client? So that's one. They're the types of things. A lot of them are what we call your micro skills. That's what a role play is, your ability to work with your clients in this space. So we don't have to know everything. We just need to be respectful and compassionate and non-judgmental, and then write down some key points to help us be able to do a better engagement process and assessment with our client. But we're working with our client to create their plan. And so they own the plan. They have that dignity of risk about whether they pick that plan up or not. And we're going to assess what stage in the decision making may they be up to. And if they are at that contemplative, then they're looking for information. If they're at the pre-contemplative, they're not close to making a decision. It's like, I'm here because I have to be here. And so your priority will be about establishing a relationship and building rapport and engagement, respectful. So they go, oh, you're not as bad as I thought. I'm here because I have to be. And we can certainly document that they have kept their appointment, and we want to validate that for our client. Well, thank you. And I understand that you may have been told to come here by another provider or family members, but you did. And I want to acknowledge that you did keep your appointment. Well, you can't make me do anything. It's like, no, I absolutely cannot. And I agree with you. This will be something that will be your journey, and I'll walk beside you at whatever pace you would like me to. So we come out of unconditional regard and compassionate inquiry. When we're here, we're curious about it. What would that be like, I wonder? But if they're in pre-contemplative, they're not there yet, but they might if they don't feel judged. They might if they think that you are actually okay to talk to. So that's our body of work, and that's what we're looking for. So recovery-led strategies, empowering the client to continue with their own plan around recovery and their strategies. We collaborate, we encourage them about, what would that be like if they did make a positive change, better health, better relationships, may be able to keep their job, maybe go back to the workplace, maybe change a different work. And then promoting the importance of those wraparound services, that holistic health and well-being to each client. So even in your instruction, we actually tell you what the assessor is looking for. Did you communicate effectively and respectfully? Did you use a range of communication strategies, which is like, did you use visual prompts or give them some resources, something to take with them? But just keep in mind that if you don't know the cognitive, the capacity and the literacy and numeracy of a client, you may make them feel uncomfortable unintentionally because we've missed that. So the getting to know is extremely important. So we check in with that person, and someone else is going to be playing the client for you. So follow the instructions. It can be family, friends, or colleagues, even if it's in a completely different sector. Or if you haven't got someone, then let our learner support officers know so that we can assist you in that space. And then the final one is, did you identify the particular drug use and the patterns and identify the effects and then the impact of these on the client so that we're working towards harm minimisation? So you found this unit CHCAOD001, a really interesting introduction into this. This is an accredited unit. It is recognised Australia-wide, and upon the completion of this unit, you can apply this to a higher qualification that has this as a credit transfer, already having completed that, and be deemed competent. And that's a nationally recognised unit that you're doing. And of course, this particular one will go to build upon all the other units that you have been doing in your short course with us. So please reach out to our team. We're here and happy to help you. Like I said, this is a very big unit. A lot of people don't recognise that they may have an addictive problem, and our role is to guide them gently into what might be some strategies around reviewing that and working with our clients on a plan to be able to have a healthier, both mentally, so psychologically, socially, and emotionally, and physically, by working through the substances and the balancing of their medications, a better understanding about the impact it has on their body, and then, of course, their overall well-being. And our role is to walk beside them as a support worker in that space.